The unbreakable Roman glass. The year was 1964. Construction workers breaking ground for a parking garage in Cologne, Germany, hit something unexpected 3 meters below the surface. It was a Roman burial chamber, sealed for nearly 18 centuries. Inside, archaeologists found what should have been impossible: a glass vessel, crystal clear, without a single crack. The bottle had survived the weight of earth, moisture, and time itself. When researchers at the Max Planck Institute examined it under electron microscopy, they discovered something that changed everything they thought they knew about ancient manufacturing. The molecular structure was wrong. Modern glass develops microfractures within decades. This Roman glass, buried since 200 CE, showed 0 internal stress fractures. The secret lay in something called manganese dioxide. Romans added it during the melting process, creating a self-healing matrix at the molecular level. When tiny cracks formed, the manganese particles migrated to fill them, bonding stronger than before. Modern glassmakers knew about manganese, but the Roman ratio was different, precise, almost impossibly so. In 1971, Corning Glassworks launched a secret project to reverse engineer the formula. They got close, very close, but their version required temperatures and pressures that made commercial production uneconomical. The project was shelved. Documents were classified under industrial trade secrets. The lead scientist, Dr. Herbert Weinstein, retired early and refused all interviews about his work. Today, Roman glass samples are restricted in most major museums. When the British Museum allowed new testing in 2018, the research team was denied access to certain measurement tools. Their published results omitted key spectroscopic data. One researcher later admitted off-record that they'd been told the complete findings were not for public release. If Romans created glass that outlasts our best modern equivalents by centuries, what else did they know that we've forgotten or been forced to forget? The Antikythera mechanism. In 1901, Greek sponge divers working near the island of Antikythera pulled up bronze fragments from an ancient shipwreck. Among the corroded pieces was something that shouldn't exist: a device of interlocking gears, carved with astronomical calculations, more complex than any known technology from its era. It would take a century of research to understand what they'd found: a computer built in 87 BCE. The Antikythera mechanism wasn't just a calendar. It predicted solar eclipses, tracked planetary movements, and calculated the Olympic Games cycle. X-ray tomography revealed over 30 bronze gears working in harmony, some with teeth so precise they measured less than 1 millimeter. The level of miniaturization wouldn't be seen again until Swiss watchmaking in the 14th century, 1,500 years later. Professor Michael Wright spent 20 years reconstructing the device at Imperial College London. What troubled him most wasn't the complexity, but the implications. This wasn't a prototype. The craftsmanship suggested a mature technology, refined over generations. That meant dozens or hundreds of similar devices must have existed, yet only one survived. Ancient texts mention mechanical wonders. Cicero wrote about a sphere that showed planetary motion built by Archimedes. These references were dismissed as exaggeration until the Antikythera find. Suddenly, they seemed like product catalogs for a lost industry. After Wright published his findings in 2006, attempts to create working replicas using only ancient tools repeatedly failed. Modern recreations required precision lathes and measurement instruments. How did Greek craftsmen achieve tolerances of 0.01 millimeters using hand tools? The device now sits in the Athens Archaeological Museum behind glass that prevents detailed photography. Requests for new scanning have been pending since 2019. The waiting list for research access is currently 8 years long. Some believe we're not meant to know what other secrets hide in those corroded gears. The Baghdad Battery. In 1938, German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig was cataloging artifacts in the basement of the National Museum of Iraq when he noticed a clay jar that didn't match any known pottery style. Inside was a copper cylinder. Inside that, an iron rod. The design was unmistakable to anyone with knowledge of electrical engineering. It was a galvanic cell, a battery. Dated to the Parthian Empire, sometime between 150 BCE and 650 CE. Koenig's theory was controversial. Ancient Mesopotamians had discovered electricity. When he published his findings, the academic world reacted with skepticism bordering on hostility. Batteries required understanding of electrochemistry, a science supposedly born in the 18th century with Alessandro Volta. How could illiterate craftsmen have stumbled onto the same principles 2,000 years earlier? In 1940, engineer Willard Gray of General Electric built a replica using the exact materials: clay, copper, iron, and vinegar as the electrolyte. It worked. The device generated 0.5 to 2 volts, enough to power small applications, or, as some theorized, electroplate gold onto silver objects. Mesopotamian texts describe methods of putting gold on silver without mentioning any mechanical process. Electroplating would explain this perfectly. But here's where it gets strange. After the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the Baghdad Battery vanished from the National Museum during the looting. Some artifacts were recovered. This one wasn't. The last published photograph of it dates to 1999. Several researchers who'd requested access in the early 2000s were told it had been moved to secure storage. No location was provided. In 2008, a documentary team was granted permission to film the museum's collection. The battery wasn't included in the catalog they received. When they asked about it, museum officials said the artifact was undergoing conservation. 16 years later, it still hasn't returned to public view. Did ancient people discover electricity? Or is someone making sure we can't prove they did? Dawn breaks over the colossi of Memnon, 2 massive stone statues standing guard at the Theban necropolis. For centuries, travelers reported something impossible. The northern statue sang at sunrise. Not metaphorically. It produced a clear musical tone that echoed across the desert, a phenomenon witnessed by Roman emperors and documented by dozens of ancient historians. The Greek geographer Strabo described it in 20 BCE as a sound like a lyre string breaking. Emperor Hadrian visited in 130 CE and heard it 3 mornings in a row. His entourage carved their testimony into the statue's base. Over 80 inscriptions from different witnesses confirmed the same thing: the stone sang. Modern analysis suggests the sound came from rapid temperature changes at dawn. As the sun heated the rock, moisture trapped in earthquake fissures evaporated, creating pressure that escaped through cracks, producing tones. But this explanation raises more questions than it answers. The statue was carved from quartzite, transported 200 kilometers from Gebel el-Silsila. Why choose a material that produces musical tones when heated? Some researchers believe the acoustic effect was intentional, that ancient Egyptian engineers understood harmonic resonance well enough to design monuments that spoke at specific times. Experiments at the University of Cairo in 1987 found that the statue's internal structure contained peculiar hollow chambers that had no structural purpose but would amplify certain frequencies. Then, in 199 CE, Roman Emperor Septimus Severus ordered repairs to the damaged statue. The singing stopped immediately and never returned. Was this coincidence? Or did the Romans deliberately silence something they couldn't control? Access to the colossi for acoustic testing requires permits that haven't been issued since 2001. Ground-penetrating radar studies proposed in 2015 were denied without explanation. The site is monitored by security cameras installed in 2012, unusual for ruins open to tourists. Someone doesn't want us listening too closely. The self-sharpening Mayan obsidian. Obsidian is volcanic glass. When fractured properly, it creates edges sharper than surgical steel, reaching thicknesses of only 3 nanometers at the cutting surface. Modern scalpels made with the finest steel measure about 300 nanometers at the edge. That's why some surgeons today use obsidian blades for precise operations. They cut cleaner, heal faster, and leave less scarring. But in 2002, researchers examining Mayan obsidian tools from Tikal, Guatemala, discovered something that defied material science. These blades, buried for over 1,000 years, still held edges measuring between 2 and 4 nanometers. Standard obsidian dulls within weeks of exposure to air and moisture through a process called hydration. These hadn't dulled at all. Chemical analysis at MIT revealed a micro-thin coating, barely 30 molecules thick, covering the obsidian surface. The coating was organic, derived from tree resins mixed with mineral compounds found only in certain Guatemalan highlands. When the blade's edge encountered resistance, the coating fractured in a controlled way, exposing fresh obsidian beneath. The blade literally renewed its own edge through use. Dr. Sarah Chen led the research team. She proposed publishing the molecular formula in the Journal of Archaeological Science. Her submission was accepted, then mysteriously retracted before publication. The journal cited concerns about replication of dangerous materials, despite obsidian blades being commercially available. Dr. Chen was denied further access to the samples. In 2009, a defense contractor filed a patent for self-renewing ceramic cutting surfaces for industrial applications. The patent application included molecular diagrams nearly identical to Dr. Chen's unpublished research. When contacted, the company claimed independent discovery. The patent was granted. It remains classified for military use. The original Mayan blades are now stored at an undisclosed facility in Washington. Research requests are processed through the Department of Defense. None have been approved since 2010. The unrusting iron pillar of Delhi. Standing in the Qutb complex in Delhi is a pillar that shouldn't exist. 7 meters tall, weighing over 6 tons, composed of 98% pure iron, and it hasn't rusted. Not in 1,600 years, not through monsoons, droughts, or the corrosive pollution of modern Delhi. The surface shows no oxidation, no protective coating, no paint, just bare iron, defying chemistry. Iron rusts. That's fundamental science. Exposure to oxygen and moisture creates iron oxide. Steel bridges built in the 1950s need constant maintenance. The Eiffel Tower requires repainting every 7 years. Yet this pillar, forged around 400 CE during the Gupta Empire, stands pristine. Metallurgists from the Indian Institute of Technology spent decades analyzing it. They discovered the secret lay in phosphorus content. The iron contained about 1% phosphorus, higher than typical ore. When exposed to Delhi's climate, a thin layer of misawanite formed, a compound of iron, oxygen, and hydrogen that protects the metal beneath. But here's the problem. Creating this protective layer requires specific atmospheric conditions and a phosphorus distribution so uniform it suggests deliberate purification techniques. Modern steel mills can't achieve this uniformity without electric arc furnaces and computer-controlled processes. The Gupta smiths had neither. They used charcoal forges and hand-powered bellows. Yet somehow they created iron purer and more stable than anything produced before the 20th century. In 2003, the Archaeological Survey of India built a fence around the pillar. Previously, visitors could touch it, and millions had over the centuries, their hands polishing the surface to a dark sheen. Now it stands isolated. The official reason, preservation. The real reason became clear when a research team from the University of Michigan was denied permission to take core samples in 2011. A leaked email from the Ministry of Culture mentioned strategic material properties and national security implications. The correspondence was never acknowledged officially. The indestructible Mayan blue. In the humid jungles of southern Mexico, Spanish conquistadors found cities painted in blues so vivid they seemed to glow even in shadow. The color appeared everywhere: murals, pottery, ceremonial masks, temple walls. 500 years of rain, sun, and jungle growth should have erased those pigments. They didn't. Today, Mayan blue remains as brilliant as the day it was applied, while European paintings from the same era have faded to ghosts. The mystery deepened in 1931 when chemist H.E. Merwin analyzed samples at the Carnegie Institution. The blue wasn't lapis lazuli or any known mineral pigment. It was something else entirely. A hybrid molecule combining indigo dye with a clay mineral called attapulgite, heated to create a bond that exists nowhere else in nature or historical art. Modern paint chemistry took decades to understand what the Mayans had achieved. They'd created an organo-clay complex where organic molecules become trapped in the crystal lattice of clay at the atomic level. The process requires precise temperature control during heating, around 190 degrees Celsius, and specific ratios of materials. Too hot and the indigo burns, too cool and the bond doesn't form. In 1993, Pfizer Chemical attempted to synthesize Mayan blue for industrial applications. They succeeded in the laboratory but couldn't scale production economically. The patent was filed, then abandoned. Internal memos suggested the process offered no commercial advantage over synthetic alternatives, yet those alternatives all fade within decades. What makes this suppression especially troubling is the potential application. Mayan blue is resistant to acids, bases, and biological solvents. It doesn't degrade in sunlight. It could revolutionize everything from outdoor signage to solar panels. Yet research funding dried up in the late 1990s. The formula isn't exactly secret. We know the ingredients, but knowledge isn't the same as understanding. Something in the Mayan process, some subtle timing or technique, remains lost. The acoustic resonance chambers of Malta. Beneath the island of Malta lies the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, a subterranean temple carved from solid limestone around 3300 BCE. It's not the age that puzzles archaeologists, it's the acoustics. The main chamber resonates at exactly 111 Hz when certain tones are produced. Human voices at that frequency create standing waves that fill the space, making words seem to come from everywhere and nowhere. In 2008, neuroscientist Dr. Linda Maltese tested the chamber's effect on brain activity. Using EEG monitors, she found that exposure to 111 Hz shifts brain function from the left frontal lobe to the right temporal region, the area associated with emotion, creativity, and altered states of consciousness. People reported feeling vibrations in their bones, seeing colors, experiencing what they described as presence. The builders had no oscilloscopes or frequency analyzers, yet they carved resonance chambers with mathematical precision, creating specific acoustic effects in different rooms. One chamber amplifies male voices, another responds only to frequencies above human hearing range. The architecture suggests deliberate acoustic engineering, not religious coincidence. Similar effects exist at Newgrange in Ireland and inside the Great Pyramid's King's Chamber, all built millennia before the physics of sound waves were supposedly understood, all tuned to frequencies that affect human neurological function. After Dr. Maltese published her findings, access to the Hypogeum for scientific research became severely restricted. The site now limits visitors to 80 per day, citing preservation concerns. But researchers point out the restriction began immediately after the acoustic studies went public. Recording equipment is prohibited. Extended stays for measurement are denied. In 2016, an application to install passive acoustic sensors was rejected by Heritage Malta, the governing body. No reason was provided in writing. When Dr. Maltese applied again in 2019, her emails went unanswered. The Hypogeum keeps its secrets, resonating at 111 Hz, waiting for questions no one is allowed to ask. The liquid stone of Sacsayhuaman. 20,000 tons of stone fitted together with joints so tight a knife blade can't penetrate. No mortar, no cement, just rock pressed against rock with perfect precision. The fortress of Sacsayhuaman overlooks Cusco, Peru, its massive walls assembled from blocks weighing up to 200 tons each. The official explanation: Incan workers cut and moved these stones using bronze tools and rope. But there's a problem with that explanation. Bronze can't cut andesite, the volcanic rock used in the construction. Even modern diamond-tipped saws struggle with it. Yet somehow, Incan builders shaped these megaliths into complex polygonal patterns with curves and angles that interlock in 3 dimensions. Some blocks have over 12 corners, each fitting perfectly against its neighbor. In the 1980s, a Peruvian historian named Jorge A. Lira collected oral traditions from indigenous communities near Cusco. They spoke of a plant, now lost, that could soften stone to the consistency of clay. The stories were dismissed as folklore until French researcher Jean-Pierre Protzen found something strange: traces of organic compounds in the joints between stones at Sacsayhuaman. In 2012, geopolymer chemist Joseph Davidovits analyzed these residues. He identified oxalic acid, a compound found in certain Andean plants that can, under specific conditions, dissolve the surface layer of stone, making it temporarily moldable. The process would require knowledge of chemistry that wasn't supposed to exist in pre-Columbian America. Attempts to replicate the technique have failed. The plant species mentioned in oral traditions, possibly Yotkacha or a relative, appears to be extinct. When Davidovits published his findings, funding for further research was denied. His laboratory samples from Sacsayhuaman were lost during transit from Peru. The site itself is now monitored by cameras. Touching the stones is prohibited. Taking samples requires permits that take years to obtain and are routinely denied.